came to see. That's the Long Beach I came to find. Thank you so much for having me here. But before I start, let me just take a minute and express just my awe at what I've seen here today and ask you all to give another round of applause for our children who were so beautiful. The dancers, both singers. You know, it's not easy getting up in front of a crowd, even if it's a crowd of friends and family. And when you look at that discipline and that structure and how much they've studied, how hard they've worked, I thank you. Thank you for letting me see them. But I also want to thank not just Todd for inviting me out here today, but I want to thank James Hodge, who has brought some of your students to our office, and we hope to see more. We hope to see more of you. I want to thank Melissa Stone for making me feel so welcome today. And of course, a special congratulations to the Grand Marshal of today's parade, the valedictorian of Long Beach High School, soon to be Yale student, to Chandler McClure. So congratulations to all of those who are here today. I am so happy to join you for this Martin Luther King Jr. celebration. And I'm so happy that you are calling it a celebration, because that's what it is. We come together and we rejoice that for a brief time we had the spirit of this great man on earth with us. And I'm also delighted that you are coupling it with your tribute to Nelson Mandela. Now we all know there are so many similarities to their stories. They had the same struggle. Both men, born in very humble circumstances, the Deep South and the native lands of South Africa. Born to humble circumstances, they came to literally stride across history, and they changed the world. They were an ocean and a continent apart, but they faced the same racism, the same hatred, the same fear, the same prejudice. And it's so amazing that they came to so many of the same conclusions. They both knew the pain of being told they did not belong in their own country. They knew the difficulty in changing Jim Crow here in the US and his cousin apartheid in South Africa. Both men knew that their struggle could cost them their lives. And they spoke about it, but they pressed on. They dedicated their lives to the struggle for freedom and equality in their homeland, but they always knew that they were speaking for and to the world. And they were more than just dreamers. They lived their commitment to the struggle every day. Those consequences were severe, they were harsh, they were stark, they were painful. Nelson Mandela, imprisoned for 27 years, didn't see his children grow up, didn't see his grandbabies born, couldn't go to his mother's funeral, couldn't go to his son's funeral. Martin Luther King Jr. jailed 29 times for his civil rights activities and ultimately, as we know, assassinated. Both men, forged in the crucible of prison, found a freedom and a clarity of vision that very few people know, even on the outside. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, Nelson Mandela's life was shaped by his time in prison. He was initially sentenced to 5 years for incitement. That's what they called it when you stood up and said, "I'm a man," in those days. They called it incitement because you might get other people saying the same thing. But then, as a leader of the African National Congress, or the ANC, the ANC's headquarters were discovered, and documents were found that confirmed Mandela and others' leadership role in the organization, as well as their plans for sabotage of property to try and get their rights. He was rearrested, he was brought to trial, and he could have faced the death penalty. The death penalty for standing up and saying, "This is my country too." The death penalty for saying, "South Africa for all South Africans." He didn't make a difference or distinction the way the government did. And at the famous trial in Rivonia in the early 60s, Nelson Mandela refused to back away from his actions. And he stood up and he told the court, yes, all these things you say I did and planned and plotted, I did them. But let me tell you why. And he stood up and for 3 hours, he talked about the African National Congress. He talked about what it felt like to be a stranger in your own land. He talked about the struggle for freedom. He talked about the desire for dignity. He talked about his goal that all South Africans, black and white, share equally in their country. Because he knew that it wasn't just those who were under the yoke of oppression, but those who are the oppressors are also suffering, even if they don't know it at that time. Now, his closing remarks, not as well known in this country until later, of course, but at the end of his speech, he spoke so eloquently, and I have a poster for you here on the wall. You'll see it right to my right in the purple. And he says, at the end of this trial, where he could have been put to death for his beliefs, he said, during my lifetime, I have dedicated my life to this struggle of the African people. I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve, but if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. Now, doesn't that sound like something you heard from Dr. King? Doesn't that sound like what we heard in the Civil Rights Movement? That understanding that the commitment called for is nothing less than absolute. And with this conviction, Mandela and the other African National Congress leaders were sentenced to a term of life. And they were sent to the prison known as Robben Island. Now, Robben Island is off the coast of South Africa, which is one of the most beautiful countries you could ever want to see. It has mountains, it has vineyards, it has beaches, it even has penguins, if you can believe it or not. And Robben Island is 5 miles off the coast of Cape Town. You can only get there by boat. It's rocky. And Robben Island is the Afrikaans word for seal island, because until they started putting prisoners there, that's all that was there were seals and a few other animal life. Now, I brought you some other pictures all the way to the far right. You will see a picture of some of the prisoners getting off the boat, coming down the gangplank, walking towards their destiny, walking towards a term of years or a term of life on the island. The only way off was to swim. The water was rocky, the water was cold, and it was infested with danger. It was a fortress. And as you walked up that long walk, you see the sign that comes up in a bit of mockery. The main gate reads, "We serve with pride," written in both English and the Afrikaans language. Of course, it was meant to taunt those prisoners, because they weren't serving with pride. They were being forced there. They weren't there because they wanted to build something. They were there because they were being punished. And Mandela went in knowing that he would spend the rest of his natural life on that rocky little post at the end of the world. He could have given up. He could have renounced his ideals and had an easier life. They would come to him and they would offer to him, if you just renounce violence, we'll get you out of here. If you just give up being in charge of the ANC, you'll get better conditions, you'll get better food. Because even on Robben Island, the conditions were segregated. White political prisoners were in jail on the mainland. Robben Island was for the black prisoners and what they called the colored prisoners, Asian and of Indian descent. And even on Robben Island, apartheid was king. And when you go to Robben Island and you take a tour, you will see they had the signs up talking about how much food the prisoners got. And the colored prisoners got so many grams of bread and rice and got meat 3 times a week. And the black prisoners got half that amount of bread and rice and only got meat once a week. and if they were being punished, would get less than that. So apartheid, segregation, even in the food they gave to the prisoners. It could have broken him. He went through cancer there. It could have made him give up. His mother died while he was there. He could have despaired. His son died while he was there. Instead, Nelson Mandela turned Robben Island into a symbol of the resistance, a place where the political prisoners shared their knowledge with each other, with other prisoners, and even with their guards. To the world, Robben Island was the place where they sent Mandela to be broken. To the prisoners, it became known as Mandela's University. Mandela, as I mentioned, spent 18 years on Robben Island. And to my left, you'll see a picture of Nelson Mandela's jail cell. The bars there, and then to the right, the blanket that he was given, the plate and cup, and the bucket that he had to use during the night as a restroom. This cell measures 7 feet by 9 feet. That's it. How many of us have a closet like that, right? He could pace it in 3 steps, he said. And when he lay down to sleep on that thin mat that he would unroll with the equally thin blanket, both his head and his feet would touch the walls. Yet in that cell, in this closet, in this place, literally at the end of the earth, Nelson Mandela was more free than many people who've never even dealt with the law. He was more free than some of us are today. And how did he attain that freedom? You know, they tried to break him. And you'll also see on the far right, right under the picture of the prisoners walking off the gangplank, see the picture with the white rock? That's the limestone quarry at Robben Island. It took up about 1/3 of the island. And that's where the political prisoners were sent to work. They gave them a pick, they gave them an axe, they gave them shovels, and they gave them buckets. And they said, you, boy, because that was their name there, you go to this limestone quarry and you break this rock. And they did that for 6 hours a day, from morning through the early afternoon. And it was make work, because sometimes they would sell the limestone, sometimes they would use it to pave the roads on the island. But for the most part, they would make the prisoners break this limestone, put it in a wheelbarrow, take it from one end of the island to the other, and the next day, your job would be to bring it right back. It was designed to show them that the jail had complete control over their lives and complete control over their emotions and could make them do anything, and they were not the master of their fate. But what did Mandela do? When the prisoners were in the limestone quarry breaking rock, they talked politics. When they were trundling those wheelbarrows up and down the island, they shared whatever news they had learned of the outside. And when they realized that just across the wall from one of the quarry walls, they had what they called the common prisoners, that is to say the violent prisoners who were there for robbery, murder, and the like. They communicated with them. They'd hide a message in a ball and throw it across the wall and invite them to join the struggle. And little by little, bit by bit, person by person, Mandela ran that jail and taught and inspired and had a whole group of people committed to the cause. The older prisoners taught the younger prisoners. They would debate history and ideas among themselves. They were taught strategy. And there were all different types of political prisoners. Much like in the civil rights movement, there were different schools of thought as to what should rule the day. The ANC was one group, and there were other political groups as well. And they would debate for hours what was more effective. Everywhere they could, they shared their knowledge and their information. If you tour Robben Island today, the tours are given and led by former political prisoners who will describe to you what it was like to do that backbreaking work day in and day out. But because of Nelson Mandela, because of his desire to turn this prison into a university. Many of them got their bachelor's degrees. Many of them learned how to read. Many of them learned mathematics. They never stopped strategizing. All the way to the far left, you'll see a picture of Nelson Mandela and his close friend and colleague, Walter Sisulu, talking in the prison yard. Right below that is a picture of the prisoners lined up in that yard, because when they weren't making them trundle that limestone back and forth from one end of the island to the other, they'd make the prisoners sit in the yard with their bucket of rocks, and they'd line up and they'd count them, and they'd make them break those rocks into smaller rocks, all designed to break them. And what they did, though, was while they were sitting there breaking rocks, they were learning. This limestone quarry could have broken all of the men. Instead, it was a place where they expanded their minds, and for a time, they left the conditions of their captivity. And also, if you tour Robben Island, just before you get on the boat that takes you across the water 5 miles out to this little piece of rock, you will see there, preserved in the drawers, you'll see the tests prisoners gave each other. Whoever had knowledge taught others. You'll see the essays the prisoners wrote on political theory, on Shakespeare, and you'll see the grades they gave each other. Now, I was never privileged to meet Mandela before he passed, but I did have occasion to work with a judge in South Africa who had spent 10 years on Robben Island. And when he and I were working on a project together in South Africa, I asked him, as I think everyone does, what that was like. And he told me how he came to Robben Island a 15-year-old radical, hot-headed, determined to blow everything up. And he met Nelson Mandela, who told him, we treat everybody with respect, and we get respect back. We never forget that we're men, and then we get treated like men. We don't take abuse from the guards, but we portray ourselves like the political leaders that we are. This man obtained his college degree while he was on Robben Island, and Nelson Mandela taught him law. And today, he sits on the Supreme Court of the Republic of South Africa. That's what Nelson Mandela did from that jail cell. 7 by 9, but it could not enclose him. The other thing that Nelson Mandela taught, aside from courses in political theory, was forgiveness. And he has said on many an occasion, as I walked out the door toward the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison. And this was a hard message for many of the younger political prisoners to learn. It was a hard thing for them to hear. What? Give up your hatred? How are we going to accomplish anything when we get out? We have to have revenge. We need retribution. We have been treated so badly for generations. And Mandela knew if he did not work toward a goal that included all South Africans, none of them would truly be free. And I met another young man right after apartheid ended. When Mandela was first elected president, I was privileged to meet a gentleman named Bulelani Nshuku, who was visiting the U.S., and he was the Attorney General for South Africa. Prior to that, he had been a civil rights lawyer in South Africa. He had defended Mandela's colleagues. He had defended those who were fighting for the cause, and he had been imprisoned many times. And he told my office, we were meeting with him, the story of how he first showed up after he's appointed by the president of the country to be the Attorney General, and he walks into his office and he sees the same lawyers who put him in jail 10 years ago. What do? Do you throw them out? Do you say, get out? And he knew they were sitting there with their desks packed. They were sitting there expecting to be thrown out into the cold. And he said to himself, I can get this small victory, I can get this small win and have my revenge on them, but then who do I have to run this office? Who do I have who knows the judges? Who do I have to pick up the cases? And he said he met with them and said to them, I know many of you, and I know you know me. And he gave them his prisoner number. And that's how you remember me. And he said, but if you are willing to work as hard with me and for me as you were willing to work as hard against me, you have a place here. And none of them moved, and they stayed and worked together. That was the South Africa that Nelson Mandela was building, and he knew that it was the hardest thing to do. But we've talked about Robben Island. We've talked about how Mandela turned it into a university. What about the guards? You may wonder, as many of the former prisoners do, it wasn't just other prisoners that ended up learning. As the men would sit in the yard and talk about history and philosophy and art, the guards would also draw near and sit and listen. And at one point in time, some of the prisoners had a hunger strike to improve the conditions of the food because it was often rotten, it was often old, it wasn't really edible. And little did they know, the guards were watching that as well. And shortly thereafter, the guards, because the guards had to live on Robben Island, they only went home 2 days a week. They had a bunk there, they had food there. The guards went on strike for better working conditions, for better food, for better hours. And they had learned that from the men that they were guarding. That was Nelson Mandela's victory. Now, I think we know also, though, everyone didn't agree with Mandela, and everyone didn't agree with Martin Luther King when he was leading the civil rights movement. America, in the 50s and 60s, many African Americans thought the civil rights movement would not succeed. Or, quite frankly, they feared for their lives. And there was also a growing call for violence. King had to navigate the waters between those two. At Robben Island, similar things were going on. The younger political prisoners would come to the island, and they were expecting to see Nelson Mandela, the firebrand, and Nelson Mandela, the defiant one. And they were shocked when they saw Nelson Mandela speaking politely with the guards and having conversations with them. What? How can you accommodate this? What? How can you talk to our oppressors? But Mandela had a long-term strategy. He gave respect when he got it, and he pushed back when he did not. He forced the guards on Robben Island to interact with him as a human being and as a man. But he was very clear that the prisoners were to control their environment as much as possible. He told them, always be polite, always be courteous. But when they tell you to run somewhere, you walk. When they tell you to walk fast somewhere, you walk slow. You determine what you do and how you do this. But Mandela knew that the guards on the island were as much prisoners there as the actual convicts. He knew that they were also part of a system that put them in place and gave them a very limited role. And so he opened up. Anything he taught to anyone, he wanted to listen. You have a quote at the bottom of your flyer from Mandela when he said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And change the world he did, as did Martin Luther King Jr. Now, Martin Luther King Jr. also was no stranger to the inside of a jail cell. And he also spoke about sharing his message with his jailers. And he talks in one speech about being in jail in Birmingham with others of the civil rights movement. And the guards would come down and talk with them after they would feed them. And the guards would try and convince them that the civil rights movement was wrong. It couldn't succeed. And segregation was right. But when they began discussing economic issues, King would point out to the prison guards, you know, we're all in the same boat. Because the poor whites in the South had been used as badly as blacks had economically, and were being used to keep African Americans down for a society that didn't even welcome them. They were in jail also. They just didn't know it. And of course, It was during King's incarceration, one of his incarcerations in Birmingham, in 1963, that he wrote one of his greatest works. I refer, of course, to the letter from a Birmingham jail. Like Mandela's speech at the Rivonia trial, this document became the new manifesto of the civil rights movement, and it outlined the moral and ethical urgency of the cause. King linked himself to oppressed people around the world when he wrote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." He could have been channeling Mandela when he wrote, "We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor, it must be demanded by the oppressed." Here we have two men on opposite sides of the world, separated by a continent and by an ocean, fighting the same fight. Both of them imprisoned for what they believed in, yet remaining free in their minds, turning their imprisonment into a lesson for others. And this raises, my friends, the question and the lesson for us today. What is your prison? What is it that makes you feel that you're not free? What is it that makes you feel trapped and alone, as if you're in a 7 by 9 foot cell? What is it that makes you give up hope? Is it the prison of racism? Is it the prison of unemployment? Is it the prison of economic loss or disappointment in your life? Does anybody have you in a prison of disappointment or low expectations? Or worse, have you put yourself there? If so, then what we can learn from Mandela and King is that any prison is what we make of it. We have come so far from when they fought to end Jim Crow and apartheid, but we haven't achieved all of our goals. They knew it would not be easy. They knew the work would continue. Mandela smuggled his autobiography out from jail and was punished for it, but he wrote, "I have walked that long road to freedom. I've tried not to falter. I've made mistakes along the way, but I have discovered the secret that after climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb. I've taken a moment here to rest, to stand and view the glorious vista that surrounds me, to look back on the distance that I have come, but I can only rest for a moment. For with freedom comes responsibilities, and I dare not linger, for my long walk is not ended." Now, my friends, if Nelson Mandela can create a university out of a limestone quarry, we can push forward with redeveloping our communities. If Martin Luther King Jr. can show his captors the commonality of the struggle, we can strengthen our schools. If these two men can remain free in their hearts and mind, despite the bars they looked through, we can mentor our young people. We can achieve so much, and we have come so far. Because of these two dreamers themselves and what they gave up, what they sacrificed, because of the commitment of them and all who struggled with them, I'm able to stand before you, the Chief Federal Law Enforcement Officer for over 8 million people. Walked into Robben Island and stayed a free man because King walked into a Birmingham jail and stayed a free man. I serve at the pleasure of the first African American president of the United States of America. Because they knew that through education and the law, we would find our equality, I served with the first African American Attorney General of this country. So far, there's still more work to do. People tell us the dream is not realized because dreams never are. Mandela and King knew we had to continue working. And I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you that under this president and under this Attorney General, the Department of Justice is committed to following through with those dreams. 50 years after the March on Washington, 50 years after the Civil Rights Movement, we stand in this country at a time when we see people trying to take back so much of what Dr. King fought for. We stand in this country, people try and take over the State House and reverse the goals that have been made in voting in this country. But I'm proud to tell you that the Department of Justice has looked at these laws and looked at what's happening in the Deep South. And in my home state of North Carolina, has brought lawsuits against those voting rights changes that seek to limit our ability to stand up and exercise our rights as citizens. And those lawsuits will continue. But more than that, it's more we have to fight. The dream is still continuing, not only in the courts, but in our schools. Now we all know, education is the key. And we understand that discipline is important. We understand that rules are important. But we also know that when we sit and look at schools that have these zero-tolerance programs, they are often used, and they take our babies, minority children, black children, Hispanic children, and they put them out of school before they have a chance to learn. And so the Department of Justice, this past year, has gone into the South, although we're looking further, and brought the first school-to-prison pipeline cases against school districts in Alabama. Because we have to let all of our children have a free and full chance of education. We still will have disappointment and delay. We know this. But Mandela and King show us the power of maintaining the belief in what is right and what is just. As Dr. King said, the arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Let that arc be shaped with all of our hands, through commitment, through education, through hard work, and dedication to the ideals of equal justice for all. In that way, we honor both of these great men, and we honor the promise that is within all of us and that we saw shining so brightly from our children here today. I want to thank you for having this program. I want to thank you for recognizing that King and Mandela are with us now. I want to thank you for recognizing that a jail cell can't stop the message. I want to thank you for recognizing that they were more free than any of us are, and they teach us how to be free. I want to thank you so much for inviting me to share in this moment.